Welcome to Mud 79. I'm Fearless Fred Kennedy, the creator of this totally original and in no way authorized Star Wars fan fiction podcast. If you're listening to this, you probably love Star Wars. I do too, and have always dreamed about telling my own story in a galaxy far, far away. A story that's less about the Jedi Temple and more about those who were on the front lines. A boots-on-the-ground story about how those living in the galaxy survive the horrors of war. That's what Mud 79 is all about. If you're new to the show, welcome, but please be aware this is a series. So if you don't want to be totally lost, start from the beginning with episode 1. You don't want to be a stormtrooper. This is episode 22. This is no cave.
The 79th Platoon foil an attempted ambush at a large freelance mining settlement, and with the help of the miners, launched their own assault on a Cestin airbase, saving the lives of hundreds of prisoners. They also called in support from orbit and secured another extensive underground secessionist stronghold. A Cestin airbase? An underground military outpost? Just what are those tunnels hiding? And how many more civilians have the enemy taken hostage? Let's find out.
I was staring at the cherry on my tobacco stick, watching the lines of red and orange eke their way down, burning the paper. That thin trail of smoke flicker and float, ignoring the movement all around me. Prisoners being processed, the dead being inspected. Intelligence officers were speaking with the hostages we'd saved.
Hand me that back, the spray.
Medical staff giving them a once-over, making sure none of them were carrying disease. Then they'd get loaded onto the DX-9s and ferried off to Meldeen. There were a lot more than expected. Over 200, in fact. Just shy of 3.
You're gonna be okay. Just breathe.
The warehouses on the south side of the runway, where squads 1 and 3 came down, were full. Most of them were severely malnourished, chained together, beaten. Some had been there for months. They'd get sold to slavers, or sometimes conscripted to wear a charge collar and pick up a rifle. They were picked up from all over. Seshers would roll up on any group of prospectors, farmers, hunters, anyone they felt they could squeeze for creds. I heard this firsthand, because I had a few passing words with some of those prisoners after the fighting died down. Some more DX-9s came down from orbit with a bunch of medical aid. And the rest of the rear echelon types that were now heading in and out of the cave entrance. They were sure to keep us away, didn't want us seeing anything beyond our pay grade. But I'd taken a look in there with my scope. It was a landing bay. And there were dozens of shuttlecraft, different makes, sizes. There was even a shuttle elevator near the back. Big enough for a mid-sized hauler. Like the one that came out of the tunnel entrance during the fighting. And that meant this cave was only the entrance to something a whole lot bigger. I was trying to get a cleaner look when some dick in a white tunic came over and asked for my TK number, what I was doing, who my commanding officer was, blah, 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 blah. I said I was just realigning my scope and turned to face the other way. I wasn't the only one who'd taken a peek either. After the LT dismissed us and we were waiting for transport back to the hotel, a bunch of us sat around and slung the dope, chewing the fresh rations doled out to us by the crews on the shuttlecraft.
You guys see that empty tank in the cave? I've never seen one in person before. Seriously? They had an MTT? One of those big droid deployment tanks from the Separatists? You know, I grew up in one of those. When I was a kid, there was this battle fought on the outskirts of our settlement. Separatists took over this blast tech factory a few clicks away. We're only there a year and the Republic rolled in. Big firefight, too. We spent 3 months holed up in a shelter before it was done. Scorched earth shit. When we got out, there was an MTT unit just sitting out in the middle of town. Looked brand new. My parents got the juice going and we rode around in it for years. Our home on grav lifts. A lot of room in those things.
If you want, maybe I can go steal it for you. I know how to prime an engine. I had a cousin who worked for Bactoid Industries. They use the same ignition in pretty much everything.
One of the guys from First Squad was leaned up against a prefab, filling us in about the southern approach and how the LT came close to losing his shit when he saw the state of the hostages.
So we popped the lock to the first warehouse, the smaller one. He gets a look at the state of him, all dirty and terrified, then spots a Sesher scrambling to get a shot off. He pops the guy with his rifle, then moves in. And some other Sesher comes out of nowhere. Orto grabs him by the neck, drills him into the wall so hard the guy's out cold. Vama moved in to see if the prick's neck was broken. Orto was cold.
Dessyk was a good guy. He came in with Sergeant Kyra when we replaced Squad 1. He was orphaned during the Clone War, raised in a group home, and signed up the first day he was able. Didn't talk about it much, but he said enough that you knew it was far from a wholesome childhood. Didn't even see Murray until we were about to head back to the hotel. We'd been laying around for a bit. Sun was well set. Conversations, heart rates had died down. Most of us were asleep. And I was resting against my pack, looking up at the sky, enjoying the quiet with a fresh pack of sticks. Then Murray comes lumbering up and drops his ass down beside me.
You got one of those for me?
I pulled out my pack and handed it over. He pulled one out and took in a deep breath, then let out a sigh.
Shitty day, huh?
I could tell he didn't want to talk, but he would eventually. He always did. For now, though, yeah, we just needed to sit there and reflect on the fact that we'd made it through another day, and that another 8 members of our platoon didn't. We didn't say much as we waited to head back home. He mentioned some stuff about the Terrakasi tournament, but at no point was he getting into detail. It was that knee-deep chatter that one makes when they just want to avoid silence. And sometimes that's what you need. Eventually, though, Sergeant Melnow rolled up on us.
You lot, we got a transport back to the hotel. Pack your shit and get on board.
I hoped to hop on board one of those DX-9s, but no such luck. It was one of our lardies that we came in on. Wouldn't have mattered much. I think I was asleep before we were even fully loaded. Packed in again, that oh-so-familiar stink of sweat, damp fatigues. It was a chore to hit the showers when I got back to post, but it was needed. The parasites would get deep on you if you didn't catch them right away. They love to get in on the back of your knee. Didn't even feel them most of the time. Best to get them in the showers off the hop. And it was always ideal to hit the rack clean. Kept the crawlies out of your sheets. I hung my shit to dry, gave it a very loose passover, promising to be more thorough in the morning, and then I passed out. 79 was off rotation for a few days given the losses, injuries, all that. Those of us still in decent shape were on assist duty around the camp. Had the option of picking up patrol details outside the wire, but I opted to spend my time giving my pack a thorough overhaul. Went through every piece of gear I had, everything. Rejigged my vibro blade, repaired the loose buckles on my webbing, even replaced some of the clasps and sections of belting. Put in for a new set of IRDs at the supply shack, too, given mine were pockmarked and riddled with tears. Got called in to pull some shifts in the armory. Mondi was there, too. Even that guy Kwai, the Pantoran from the engineer platoon. We were sparring partners when I signed up for Terrakasi. He wound up getting cut a few rounds before me, but I guess he had experience with weapons and was called in to help alleviate the growing backlog of malfunctioning blasters. The word came in from on high that we needed as many guns as primed as possible.
I bet they need all this shit for some big op. Another Dom Jew, with us laying them in the dirt.
That's possible, but all the big stuff is happening out east, by the bay. I'd bet that these guns are being retrofitted so that they can be handed out to the militias and the volunteers. That's the MO the Republic had back during the Clone Wars. You arm the sympathizers and the volunteers and send them in first.
What about heavy weapons? Shuttles and speedsters and shit? They gonna be handing out any of that stuff either?
I can't see that happening, especially not shuttles. We're short on lardies everywhere. I do know they're moving a lot of armor to the eastern front, though. A lot. Remember when we landed? How they had armor all over and nice, even distribution? Not now. All the Sabres and ATSTs? They're out east.
I mentioned we saw Sabre tanks in the last raid we were part of, storming that Sesher airbase.
Those must have been Navy assets, or directly linked to the Stormtrooper Corps, because I can show you the armor deployment logs. We have to know all that stuff for repairs. The big guns, those are east.
We didn't need him pulling records for us. He was a solid guy. And having friends in the engineering corps was always a smart move. Same with having friends in the armory. Whenever I was in there, which platoon's backlog you think I tackled first? Wasn't the 77th. We ran through the days of downtime and inevitably got the call to head out again. No resupply. Down 8 sets of boots. Second and third took most of the hits, which tracked as they had the most fresh gray in their ranks. We were told this was a standard tower mission. 4 days, heading far north too. The northernmost section of the Toblin Range. Met up at the pad in the morning. We had 2 fresh lardies, a full 4. Textbook. New pilots too, both of them human. They were talking with Sergeants Amy and Shay.
You got it, Sergeant.
Who'd been our usual stick slingers from the time we landed. They were all smoking tobacco with the co-pilots. But as soon as the LT walked out, they threw on their flight helmets and got on board. We hit Mach and the LT clicked on the comms.
As your sergeants have told you, we're heading north today. All the way out to the edges of the Toblin Range across the northern bank of the Fen River.
The Fen River was huge, fast, and cold. It was fed by runoff from the mountains, both the Toblin Range and the High Steppes, which was a range on the northernmost tip of the continent.
We'll make landfall and continue even further north on foot. Our efforts in the Bista Valley have been extremely successful in disrupting enemy activity, to the point that Command has decided we're to begin a new phase in the campaign. We're moving underground, 79.
It turned out the reason the Seshers had been so hard to root out was that they were making use of a massive series of tunnels that ran deep underground through much of the western half of the main landmass on Cestin IV. These tunnels weren't new either. They dated back to the original Republic. The Sith Jedi Wars. Command wanted us trained on tactics and weapons used not only to eliminate the enemy presence, but also to ensure we didn't collapse the tunnels down onto ourselves. The idea of scrounging around miles below the surface did a number on my stomach.
This area has seen increased Sesha activity in recent weeks as the enemy has been seeking refuge from our actions in the south. We've received reports of a larger cave system a day's march from the Fen. We're to survey the structure and confirm the enemy presence.
We landed and loaded off, same as always. Scouts were on the fringe, patrolling the front, sides, and rear, making sure no one was on us. Only one who knew where we were headed was Arkim. LT had given him the numbers. Simple approach, almost straight north. We clocked in every few minutes, made sure we had the right bearing, shifted east by northeast for a few hours near the end. Everything went ahead as planned. A day of solid marching, no stops, no contact, nothing. Didn't see a single sign of anything. Plenty of wildlife. Kept our eyes out for poda apes. They had a habit of tagging along behind troopers, sniffing around for tossed food, garbage, anything. Something they'd picked up from prospectors. The poda apes up this far north were a different breed, too. Darker fur and stockier. Fortunately, they were less aggressive. But when you held still, steadied your breathing, you could hear them howling in the distance. Sound rolling through the mountains. It was still pretty warm, muggy, especially in the IRDs, and the bugs were everywhere. That was no different than down south. Minus the slightly cooler temps, you'd be hard-pressed to know the difference between this spot and the Bista. But that changed as we moved up the mountain. The dense jungle giving way to smaller trees and grasses, shrubs better suited to the rocky conditions. I was with Puenda, making her look for trail signs. Sometimes I'd deliberately lead us off course and see if she noticed, doing all the stuff Kyra had done to us when we rejigged the units a year back. Minus popping her with a stun rifle, of course. About an hour after sundown, the comms clicked in.
All units assemble at Sector Purple, 2-1 by -583.
That was the call. We'd arrived. Primed our weapons and headed in, low and steady. We were keeping up the rear, so every now and again we'd drop and hold. Peer down our scopes, study the terrain behind us, watch for movement. It was a pattern of behavior. You just went through the motions. Trust the training. Made them instinct. This stuff was written by people who'd been here, who'd done it. We closed in on our destination, saw them gathering a ways ahead. A very ad hoc observation post, no dug-in foxholes, just hunkered down amid the stone and waiting. There was cover, but the quality of the stone was suspect. A few dets in the right places would shatter it. Send it flying like shards of razor-sharp shrapnel. We were up high in the mountains at this point, so not many trees. Smaller ones, maybe 2-3 meters high, growing in clusters where they managed to rip through the stone. Radioed we were inbound.
I see you, Corporal. You're green.
It was dark, and everyone looked gassed from the full day of marching. Weren't about to rest, though.
Listen up, 79. We've reached our destination, and I'm disappointed that only one of you, Private Saunder of First Squad, spotted the anomaly right beside our OP.
The second he finished, a huge pile of rubble that looked like the remnants of a landslide along the northern fringe of our OP vanished. It was a hologram. And where it stood was a mine entrance, guarded by a dozen mutters and their commanding officer. Duraweave bagging built up deep surrounding a cargo lift, every corner with a Z6. That was all we could see from our vantage point. The lift was big enough to accommodate a Lardy. I'd seen smaller things during our raids and flyouts before, but I'd always just assumed they were part of mining operations.
Had any of the rest of you done a proper full-band frequency scan, you should have spotted the resonance discrepancies. Not much, but enough that it should have been brought up. It could have been an enemy position, and if it was, we'd all be dead. Be better.
The commanding officer on the lift came over and shook the LT's hand. She was the tallest Mary Allen I'd ever seen. Over 2 meters, easy. Had thick facial tattoos running down her cheeks below her eyes. A long, loping gait when she walked. They spoke for a second, and the LT turned back to us.
We'll take the lift down to the main complex, 1,200 meters below the surface. 2 squads at a time. 1 and 2, then 3 and 4.
You heard the LT, 1. Let's get moving.
That lift moved fast. You'd feel your stomach rise up after that first drop. Almost came off your feet a bit. Then it slowed down so quickly, your legs needed to brace as the inertia nearly doubled your weight. But I have to say, totally worth it. We dropped into a massive subterranean chamber that was similar in scale to the main cargo hangar on a Star Destroyer. It reminded me of the bay we'd used for training on the Crossfire when we came out. An enormous cavern on a scale that implied majesty. And the walls were smooth. This wasn't a natural structure. This had been bored out. And there was ornamentation too. Carvings, figures. It was hard to make out with the dim utility lighting on the ground, but you could see vague imagery. There was some wear, just the inevitable march of time, but it was still haunting. The ground floor was well lit, rows of light stands running between rows of prefabs, housing for more than 200 boots, a live fire range, cargo depot, some heavy speeders, all that taking up less than half the chamber's real estate. But those lights, beams ebbing upwards, painting everything in shadows and whispers of the past. We got off the lift and were assigned quarters. I saw the LT head off with that tall Mary Allen woman. A lot of talking and nodding. The sergeants filling us in as we moved.
You'll be staying down here for the next 4 days. You'll learn tactics specifically designed for subterranean warfare, combat exercises, as well as classroom work. I know there's a lot of questions, but for now, hit the rack and we can start fresh at 0600 tomorrow. Get some sleep, 79.
Those next few days were brutal. The pace was ridiculous, a never-ending barrage of toil and information. And it was frustrating because a lot of it was really interesting stuff. The history of the caves specifically. There hadn't been any official scientific survey done, but there were indicators this cave system was more than 8,000 years old.
It could have been a Mandalorian colony.
No, it's not, Gwenda. Mandalore is at least 80,000 light years from here. Not a chance.
As much as I don't want to, I gotta side with Tolan on this.
Thank you, Savi.
The system is out past even the furthest borders of the Old Republic, and on the opposite side of the galaxy of Mandalorian space. There's really no way of telling who's responsible without some really extensive surveying, and even then, who knows?
It being built by a breakaway faction of the Sith Empire was another popular take. We all had our theories and our accumulated evidence. Gave us something to talk about at least. It was surprising how many of us had legitimate knowledge of galactic history. When I was on the Lardy and the LT said there were tunnels under the western continent, I expected some mind networks. But no, this was more like an entire underground civilization. Wide tunnels with enough room for mid-sized freight haulers and shuttlecraft. Huge, wide-open chambers remnants of towns, and irrigation channels that still carried flowing water. This was a well-organized and brilliantly engineered civilization below the mountains. Until 18 months ago, no one outside a very short list of locals knew these tunnels existed. Command only learned about them by chance during our very first flyout when we came down on that raider camp. And even then, they had no idea how extensive they were. The Seshers knew about them somehow and had been using multiple tunnel networks as a means of moving rapidly and quietly, popping up where we didn't expect it. They could move massive numbers of troops around and we'd have no idea. And they had no problem blowing sections of tunnel to keep them secret. But that was about to change. Over the course of the next few weeks, multiple platoons would be given training to ensure the remaining Sesher menace would be neutralized. We were doing marches through the underground network, learning how to tune our goggles to get optimal clarity, updating the software on our bracelets to detect signal changes, network them with the gas sensors in our masks so we didn't get poisoned. Simple things that were designed to give us a cumulative edge. A big shift was the departure from heavy weapons. We carried them, yes, but we learned how to determine whether or not the shaft structure could withstand that kind of impact. The type of stone and minerals along the cave walls to look for. All kinds of stuff. The combat training was very similar to urban combat.
Over there! Over there!
Taking control of tunnels and chambers.
Stay low!
Fire dominance.
Stay with me!
Support fire in an enclosed space.
I need backup!
A refresh from the things we were doing in the swamps and hills. The new sergeant in 3rd Squad, Mel now, he was really good with it.
When you move into a chamber that's been held by an enemy, you need to be fast and you need to be ruthless. Do not ease up. Unload with small arm fire so as to not damage the structure until it's been properly scanned and confirmed safe. Just advance and shoot. Then take cover so the mutters behind you can do the same. No one lays off. No one holds back. You hesitate and they will kill you. Do you understand? All barrels are hot until you hold the chamber.
The craziest thing they did was fire off an EMP charge while we were deep in the echoes, which is what we started calling the tunnel network because of the echoes, obviously. I never said we were too creative. Anyways, it took out our goggles. And then the sergeants made us find our way back to the main chamber where our camp was located while we were effectively blind. The 2 Keshians in our platoon, with their unbelievable eyesight, were the main reasons we even made it back at all. That still air and damp mustiness of the mines. I half expected to hear the voice of the Inquisitor in my head again, to feel cramped, like I was back in that crate on my way to shoot the fire point a year ago. But no, we were all in it together, whispering jokes, laughing under our breath. We wrapped the main mission and headed back to the hotel. Had only one more flyout before the big tournament in Floon Bay. It was part of the new strategy and went off textbook. Found a tunnel entrance and spent the next 3 days in the echoes, trudging deep, mapping and deploying transmitters. Then came out using another tunnel a few dozen kilometers away. That's all anyone was doing now, at least in our battalion. They had platoons running ops like this 24/5. The need for manpower to fully map the subterranean network was burning us out. They even pulled in a full division off the 11th 416th Legion, and their only task was mapping and surveying tunnels. Whenever they picked up enemy movement, they called it in.
Give me regular reports, please.
Or if it was small enough, eliminated it on their own.
Keep firing!
They were even allotted armored units to assist. Rumor was they'd been lobbying for an opportunity to prove their combat effectiveness. Up to that point, they'd mostly been involved with the construction of defensive networks out east, dealing with the steady flow of refugees, and putting in shifts of manual labor. They wanted to get their troops in the field. Don't think anyone in the 934th had any qualms about giving them a few thousand clips of tunnel to map out and secure. Inevitably, though, the morning came when it was time to head off to Floon Bay. I thought it was going to be a big deal. Some pomp, maybe the whole company cheering us on, but no. Same as always. There was a flyout with the 80th platoon just after sunup. Standard tower patrol. While a tandem unit from the 11-416th was directly below them, clearing the echoes. The Terracassi team was milling around, talking with each other, duffels at our feet, watching the 80th prepare for their flyout. The LT from the 80th was a slight human female with a booming voice. She had two of her troopers on the Terracassi team and shook their hands, exchanging some laughter, wishing them well. She called out to the rest of us, wishing the same before boarding the Lardies with her platoon and getting airborne. The captain came out with the rest of the LTs and junior officers. A lot of handshaking. I got the same praise until Orto reached out for my hand.
You've earned this, Kwai. Enjoy your time in the city and keep out of trouble.
He actually gave me a grin and clasped my shoulder. The LTs cleared off and the camp assumed its routine. Saw a Lardy in the distance coming in from the east. That was it. Came in fast and dropped steady. Navy paint job. Great condition, too. Looked fresh off the line. The doors popped and we went on board. I was on the bench next to Murray when our bracelets lit up. It was a notification that command of the hotel had been temporarily transferred to Orto, which fit, but no doubt pissed him off. Meant he couldn't be out in the field with his unit. There were also some notes about incoming FNGs and replacements, standard duty rosters and reports. Routine was always routine. Lardy pulled up high and hit Mach. It was smooth, too. Above the air pockets. No hard banks. Straight ahead. Flying easy. Then we dropped low. Maybe 200 meters up. The vent slid open and we all took a look down as we did a flyby past the base, taking it all in. On the southern edge of the city, along the coast, the Empire had built a massive military installation, poured out west and south a few dozen clicks. Most of the far southern portion was dense woodland covering a delta. They used it for war games, intensive training.
For the Empire!
Must have been nice getting trained on post rather than across the wire in hut country. When I stepped off the Lardy, I was hit in the face by that cool ocean air. Dry, soothing, so clean. It was the definition of fresh, and it seeped into your skin like it was washing you off. For a second, I remembered the way it felt when I was being dragged back to Camp Vibus after that beating at the brothel. And it was a whole lot nicer this time around, akin to what had been on Camp Vibus, nearly identical design. There were stands too, and they were full. Civilians cheering and hollering, fanfare, bands playing. It was like a festival. I loved it. Made me smile. Just a different vibe from the hotel. I was confused by the presence of civilians in such numbers on a base like this. A military hub is usually locked down, but this place was different. Fort Kapani, named for the Twi'lek star cruiser that had allegedly begun colonizing the world centuries earlier, was broken into two parts. The smaller of the two, around 10%, which was where we landed, was open to the public. It was nestled right along the edge of the city, an extension of one of the main roads. You passed through a security gate,
Let me see your identification.
which was actually just a monument to Imperial glory. A statue of a stormtrooper carved in bronze with insignias of the 3 legions serving in the Cestin system. There was also a black marble plinth engraved with symbols of Imperial might, the names of the soldiers who died for the Empire since we came. That gate was the only way in or out. You needed to pass by. You were guaranteed to look at it, to be awed by saturation. But once through, you could access the facilities available to the public. Massive entertainment complex, holo theaters, simulation pods, a fitness facility on par with anything in the central systems. Free medical clinics, free schools with a fast track to the Imperial Academy. You name it. They even had a cluster of Limmy fields. One with stands.
You know why this place is so nice, right? Up this close to the big city, they want the locals to see how hot shit we are. Shock and awe, hearts and minds. All that tauntaun shit. But whatever, as long as it gets them to sign on the line, keep our numbers up.
This was a classic Imperial tactic. Show them how great life would be if they only got in line. Youth programs, athletics, recreational facilities, everything can be yours if you become one of us. Way better than what those oligarchs from Hallfaken Bay were offering. Soon as we unloaded, the Lardy took off again. Probably to fetch more fighters, dignitaries, or something, who knows. The tarmac was busy. Logistics types in gray work dress directing people around as the bands played in the background. It was a very loud marvel of efficiency. The second our boots were on the ground, some junior officer called out to the skip.
You the 20th Company, man?
That's us.
If you could just follow me to your transport, we'll get your team to its quarters.
10 paces off the shuttle, and we were already being directed where to go. Classic Empire. Don't give people time to think, just tell them what to do. We piled onto a ground transport that had bench seating along the back, designed to transport a full squad in its gear, or whatever else needed hauling. Troopers were cargo, after all. We passed all the public facilities, moved towards the main portion of the base. Way more what I was used to. Doom, gloom, and pure architectural aggression. A full-on fortified Duracrete wall with embedded shield generation points, anti-aircraft towers, heavy cannon. If the civvy side was meant to welcome, this was meant to terrify. Our transport was waved through the gate, akin to what we had at Vibus, only on a grander scale. After the walled entrance, you were funneled past a security checkpoint that was a fortress in its own right. A squat, multi-story tower. Looked like it was designed solely to withstand heavy bombardment, either from orbit or heavy aircraft. Kept riding past and saw the same layout at nearly every Imperial facility. Central admin dead ahead, just like that security point, only larger, lower profile than expected, save the main observation tower, which sat well over 100 meters tall. Its main structure buried multiple stories beneath the surface. Paved roads with troopers marching along while their instructors tore into them. An airfield with multiple fighter wings, TIEs, Lardies, even a collection of DX-9s and other Navy-issued assault craft. Past the airfield, we saw an armored division, sabers of every make and class, along with some of those AT-ST walkers. Even the six-legged AT-TEs from the Clone Wars, thumping around like oversized beetles. But the tour had to stop sometime, and we pulled up next to a generic-looking barracks house. Apparently, the troopers that normally held occupancy here were off in the fields within the base perimeter, staying in tents for the duration of the tournament. Lucky them.
All right, troopers, hop off and head inside. Claim your bunks and change into PT gear. We're gonna run a training session, keep everyone loose, because the blood starts flying tomorrow.
I went inside just to go along with everything. I wasn't part of the team, but figured this meant me too. Then as I was heading in, the skip pulled me aside.
Not you, Kwai. You just claim your bunk and unload your kit. There's an intelligence crew inbound. The brass has separate plans for you.
She smiled and must have read the expression of dread on my face.
All good things, Corporal. Don't worry.
Of course. Good things. I was just packing my kit into a locker when Murray walked by.
Know what time you're gonna be back? I was thinking I'd save you some grub when the mess drops off the hall.
I shrugged my shoulders and sighed, not having the slightest clue. But I assured him if I managed to wrangle a bottle of Kang Tree, I would ensure he got a taste.
You know I appreciate that, but I can't be downing booze now, man. It'd mess with my hydration levels and hormones and all that stuff.
On my own, with a bunch of rear-line stiffs, no one to drink with, and less than half a pack of sticks. This was really shaping up to be a fun trip. I watched the team joke around with each other as they got dressed and headed outside. When the rear door swung open, I saw a few other squads of fighters working around on the grass. These barracks buildings were arranged in squares with an open green space behind. This section of base was normally used for basic training, filtering in recruits from all around the system before distributing them among whatever legion was short. They were still new, too. Had that smell of fresh grease on the locker hinges and the hint of new paint in the back of your throat whenever you opened the door. I drew a stick as I walked out front and plunked down on a bench. They had the exact same benches here as we had at the hotel in Vibus before that. Standardization has its drawbacks, but for all its monotony, it certainly gives you a sense of comfort to see and feel something familiar when everything else is in constant flux. I took a few drags and wished I had a cup of bean coffee. Looked around, did my best to relax. For all the letdown, I was safe. No combat, no drill or training exercises. Boredom was safe. The one thing I hadn't noticed on the way in, but was coming to appreciate, was the landscaping. The roadways had standard drainage ditches and stuff, but there was a genuine effort to add some beauty. A lot of gardens. They lined the walkways and barracks, and there were even planters along the walls. They weren't just growing flowers either. Calvines with their glowing berries, gorbel plants with their fat yellow fruit hanging off the branches, and a lot of Nordicin, which was a great plant to have in your garden because it kept rodents away, which in turn meant more pollinating insects would show up, keep you from having to rely on those pollination droids. I was up and taking a good look at the health of the plants when my ride pulled up behind me.
With the entire 934th Legion focused on the tournament at Floon Bay, will the Seshers launch a surprise attack? Will their subterranean combat training be put to good use? And what awaits Kwai as he's separated from his fellow Mutters? That's next time on Episode 23, Dog and Mutter Show.
Thank you for joining me this week on Fearless Fred Presents Mud 79, a Star Wars fan fiction podcast. If you haven't already, make sure you follow the show so you'll never miss an episode. While you're there, don't forget to rate and review us. It helps grow the show and will make my contemptible harpy of a producer very happy. We're available for free at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and wherever else you get your favorite streaming audio. You can also listen at curiouscast.ca. Be sure to check out the show notes for more information and a full listing of Mud 79's cast. If you want to reach out to me directly, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at fearless_Fred or email me at mud79@curiouscast.ca. This show is hosted and written by me, Fred Kennedy, and Dila Velazquez, the Harpy, our producer. Sound design is by moi, and final production is by Rob Johnson. I'll see you next week for more Mud 79.